But then, okay, so the question is, for what? Like, who cares? For what? You'll hear people like Peter Attia giving his rules on, for longevity, you need to be able to lift X, 1 point whatever times your body weight bench press.
Right, yeah. Brian Johnson does the bench press 240 because that's the 98th percentile of
It's so
18-year-olds.
stupid. It means
dude, first off, 18-year-olds, knock it off. But anyway.
Also, it's completely bullshit. There is no such
Yeah.
thing as how much you have to lift for longevity.
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
Welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barbin. With me is Brad Pilon. And today we're going to talk about how strong you should be. I've had a few people ask, I don't know, just people want to know. Like,
how strong should you be? Oh, like on specific lifts?
Yeah. I mean, there, you'll see articles or podcast episodes, people talking about how much should you bench press? How much should you,
based on your, okay. Yeah.
How much should you be able to squat? All this, as if everyone does.
Putting down. Yeah. Okay.
Right. As if everyone even does these exercises. First of all, you could have an existing injury that stops you from doing a given exercise. So there is no such thing as how strong you could or should be. You just can't. Right. So I've separated a shoulder a long time ago. So flat bench press is a bit of a problem for me. So it's always safer for me to do incline. So I wouldn't even know if there is such a thing as how much you're supposed to bench press. I'll never get there because my shoulder can't handle it. It'll just pop out of joint. So maybe there was a strength I could have got to, but I'm not gonna.
I'm trying to think of
same thing with some people can't squat. They're either not built for it or they've had a pre-existing injury and they can't do it. So there's no such thing as how much you should squat. There's no such thing as how much you should do of any of this stuff. But people still have this fascination with how strong, and again, when I say people, it's typically speaking about guys. But then, okay, so the question is, for what? Like, who cares? For what? You'll hear people like Peter Attia giving his rules on, for longevity, you need to be able to lift X, 1 point whatever times your body weight bench press.
Right, yeah. Brian Johnson does the bench press 240 because that's the 98th percentile of 18-year-olds.
It's so stupid. It means,
dude, first off, 18-year-olds, knock it off. But anyway.
Also, it's completely bullshit. There is no such thing as how much you have to lift for longevity. There's no proof of that. There has not been a study where people who can lift X amount of weight live longer.
Could you imagine?
It's just ridiculous. It's so dumb. Some of these people who, I mean, again, I seem to always rip on Peter Attia, but his podcast is how I found the cancer. So appreciate you for that, Attia. But people can get a little bit ahead of themselves or caught up in like all these ways of measuring. Oh, I need to be this, and I need to have this level of omega-3s in my blood and this level of LDL. And then I have to be this strong and my VO2 max has to be this. And you could just stress yourself out for all of these stupid measurements that really don't mean anything. I had this thought. I was just at the pharmacy the other day and I was sitting next to a couple of older women. One of them was 70 years old and the other one was 85 years old. We were just sitting in a section waiting for the pharmacy. Right. And we were just talking about whatever. And the 70-year-old one like volunteers at the hospital. She's totally vibrant and bouncing around and got lots of energy. And then the 85-year-old woman was just as vibrant, really had a very positive outlook. We were relating on overcoming cancer. She'd overcome breast cancer and had metastasized, but clearly she got it. She went through chemo. She's 85 years old. Neither of those have ever lifted a weight. They're not. It doesn't matter.
I was just
like
thinking about that.
They don't, like my mom's 78 and she's totally mobile, never lifted a weight in her life. So this nonsense that there's a weight you're supposed to lift, it's no such thing.
Well, we still don't know. That's the thing. Okay, so when I was in high school, I was unique because I was like one of the people who lifted weights, right? Like there were not a large group of us. And I was, who didn't also play football or hockey. Right. But like just for the weird like aesthetic stuff. Whereas now you can't find a guy in high school who probably doesn't at some point.
Yeah.
So I don't know when we're going to get real data on the effect of lifelong weight training on life extension and quality of life, because there isn't anyone in their 70s isn't anyone. There are very few people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, etc., who have a lifetime
of lifting weights
behind them, right?
I would say Gen X, our generation, is probably the first one with a significant number of people who have been lifting weights since high school.
Yeah.
But I doubt even the baby boomers have enough to even put a data set together on it. Not one that you can get your hands around.
Now he's 70s, right?
He's 70 something. Yeah. The golden era bodybuilders. But there's a tiny amount of them. And I don't think there's
balance it out with celebrity level wealth and influence to keep yourself healthy as well, right?
But I mean, and I don't mean people like the bodybuilders themselves or celebrities and people who are using anabolics and growth hormone and all that stuff. I mean, just millions of people who just go to the gym on the regular. Our generation's the first one to really do that.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And even out of that, there's a tiny, tiny amount of people who lift weights specifically.
Yeah. And consistently. We got lots of friends who lift really, really
off and on
consistently for 12, 16 weeks every couple of years.
Yeah. I always tell this story. I was a trainer at a gym for a little while in college, and our manager said only 1% of the people who have a gym membership use the weight room. Yeah. Of people who have a gym membership. So that not 1% of the population. So we're talking 1% of 1%, because almost nobody goes to the gym anyways. And out of them, a tiny, tiny minority go to the gym, go to the weight room. So there is no data on this. There is no data on lifelong weight training and what it does into how it affects. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm a huge advocate of it, but clearly people are making it into their 80s and 90s without lifting weights. So there is no how much you should, again, speaking just from longevity right now, there's no such thing as the amount you're supposed to lift or should lift. It probably is beneficial. I would argue it must have some benefit from a coordination thing, a balance thing, and not being susceptible to a fall and breaking a hip, which could be really, really bad. Yeah. And the mortality on a broken hip's really, really bad. So from those standpoints, you can likely reduce certain risks, but it doesn't mean you can't make it a long life without lifting weights. It's just one thing. Again, just from the standpoint, how strong you should be for how long you can make it. It's not going to, your life's not going to get any longer, but you might actually reduce some of the potential risks from a musculoskeletal thing, like a bad fall. You might not be as susceptible to a fall if you're a little bit stronger, your joints are a little bit more durable, and you're a little bit more balanced from training. So I could see that being the argument for why weight training can help, but lots of people get a long life without ever doing that type of training. So if that's the one thing you're thinking about, yeah, there's some data saying it might do something, but a lot of people don't need to do that.
I wonder if they're trying to correlate weight lifted to muscle mass. I mean, that would be something you'd find in a lot of weight training books, right? Be like, to know that you've really developed your upper body, you need to be able to do a chin up with your body weight plus 100 and twice your butt. There are so many examples of that not being the case. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if these examples are just outliers, but they exist, right? So we all know, there's people out there using bench press who can bench press extraordinary weights and don't look like they train. Right. And then there are the calisthenics guys who can just do freakishly heavy chin-ups, and they're built, but they're not Coleman or Schwarzenegger type build. Okay. So the idea of metric is almost just a alpha dog type of, if you're not doing 2x your body weight. Now you could look at it as what are the average limitations, right? So based on the average limitations of strength, if you're bench pressing twice your body weight, you've done very, very well. I think we could say that, right? Be like, that's pretty phenomenal.
Okay, how about this? What if you just genetically, naturally have that much strength?
Or what if you've got that much strength, but you're 100 pounds overweight? That kind of falls apart too, right? So
is the benefit from gaining that much strength from working out, or what if you're just naturally really strong?
Yeah, I was just more thinking if people try to compare themselves to like an elite level, right? So not for the longevity point of view, but just some sort of like, here's an interesting way to look at it though. What if we pulled it apart and put it back together as at roughly this weight lifted for that exercise, you're kind of done? Like then you don't have to worry about getting any stronger. But I guess that would be goal specific. So if that makes sense for a sport, when we can be like, based on an algorithm based on the amount of people who play that sport at elite level. You only need a squat that is 2.5 times your body weight, and it doesn't seem like anything above that helps that sport. That I could see that making sense, maybe if you're a pro athlete trying to.
Yeah. So I guess okay. So I jumped straight to the longevity thing as one example of it. It just doesn't matter. Like there's plenty of examples of people who've lived a long life and never lifted a weight.
Yeah.
So, but again, maybe some risk reduction for falls. Probably falls in the bone density thing is the more important one. Not to mention the metabolic benefits of exercising. But again, none of that really has anything to do with a true strength number. And then if you want to get to a genetic thing, we know people who are massively strong who never worked out.
Mm-hmm.
And when they did work out, they got to world-class level strength. So is there a benefit to the act of getting stronger no matter where you started? Or to your point, at a given body size, is there an amount of strength and then you're done? Because if that's the case, we know people who never needed to lift a weight. They already have the strength in them all along.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of people like Maz and a couple of guys I lived with in a dorm in college. There was a couple. Yeah, Maz so strong. Yeah. There's a couple of guys in my dorm. They were farm boys, big, strong guys, and they wanted to start working out. So they're like, "Hey, Barbie, can you take us to the gym?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we all used to go as a group." So they just came and worked out with us.
Yeah,
and they didn't know what they were doing, so I kind of just showed them a couple things. And one of their first. The one guy was bench pressing 300 pounds within a week. And he's like, "How am I doing?" I'm like, "You don't need to go to the gym. You're fine. Like you're stronger than everybody in our whole dorm. You don't, you can go if you want to, but you're already the strongest person in our whole dorm. So I don't it's already there. So maybe he's partly just a big guy, but also maybe working on the farm built strength. So it was already kind of there, but is it like your upper body strength, specifically your bench press strength is way higher than mine. I'm never going to catch you, especially pound for pound. I'm bigger than you and I'm not as strong as you. So do you just not have to lift and it's just all there? Or is there a benefit to you lifting, whatever the benefit is?
Yeah.
How strong should you be given you're really good at that lift and I'm terrible at that lift?
And for why? So if I could think back to like the days working in the industry, right? So we would have an office full of guys who lifted every day after work. There's 200 plus of us. And I had one of the top-ish bench presses, but definitely not the top-ish upper body physiques in that group. So
no, you're just exceptionally good at that one lift.
Yeah, but
very specific.
So for people who are like, but you need to hit a certain level of strength for real hypertrophy. I'm like, well, apparently not, because those guys aren't anywhere near me and they were bigger. Right. So it doesn't really relate that way. To your point, it doesn't really relate to longevity. I think there's measurements that are useful for sport, but I don't think they are what people think they are. Like the two for hockey, for elite level kids that are 14, 15, 16 years old, my best two measurements are peak power, so vertical jump and weight, and VO2 max. Right. Yeah. And you might be like, but it's not a VO2, but you take those numbers. And if I lined up the teams we've worked with and be like, these are the top guys for those two compare, you're like, those are our top players.
VO2 max makes sense. Because
and peak power, right, is if you get a kid who's really heavy, but can jump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That translates. Right. But that's not squat. That's not deadlift. And they didn't translate that way. So my peak power kids, some of them were really good at squatting. Some of them sucked, right?
Jumping specifically is an example of power and muscle coordination. Have you ever seen people who can't jump? It's awkward.
Yeah.
But your best athletes can jump, and that's like it's a ballistic movement, obviously, but it's a muscle coordination thing and a power thing all at once. I always used to say you could tell if someone's an athlete if they can just shoot a jump shot. Yeah, because that means they can generate the power and the coordination to accelerate off the ground.
Yeah.
So that's muscle coordination and power. Also, they have the hand-eye coordination, the dexterity to actually shoot the ball and get it somewhere. Like if they can actually put it in.
Upper body, lower body, so they can be moving their lower body one way and move the upper body as opposed to just like the 1-2.
Yeah. So when you see these like football linemen who can also shoot a jump shot and dunk a ball, you're like, okay, that's an athlete because they can move a large mass around with that degree of coordination. So it's again, none of this has anything to do with strength. So
yeah, and they're weird. And when people ask strength, to your point, they're talking about gym exercises, but just none from an athletic translation to sport performance. None of them. Like so many measurements, right? Like asking the guys I work with, so many measurements, and those were the two, and they just make sense, right? If the biggest guy or girl who can jump the highest and still have a good VO2 max, that's a stallion, right? Like that's someone who can do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there just aren't that many sports that are upper body specific, so
Not
none of
really.
that stuff really translates, except if you want to count like powerlifting to sport, etc. And then if you are going to speak specifically about powerlifting, then it's how much should you lift? Is like as much as you can, because that's the sport.
Yeah, it's just
Right?
never ending. Just
There's
go
no
and
there's
go
no
and go and
cutoff.
go. Right.
So
Same with
then it's
Olympic lifting. It's just more and more and
Yeah.
more until you just kind of grow out of it and you just can't lift anymore.
And then the only other argument I can think of is, okay, but I just want to know how much do I need to lift to be able to say like I'm strong. And again, I think that's a difficult one because you could go pound for
Compared to
pound.
what though?
Yeah,
Just
right. And then it's so, I don't know. I've seen, if it's for hypertrophy, we already talked about volume and low volume training, high volume training in a previous podcast. Right?
in our
So
junk
we
volume
know that,
episode. Yeah.
yeah. So we know that people who are really strong build great bodies, and guys who work on lower weights, also guys and girls, build great bodies. So it doesn't relate that way. So I think it's more just like how much, in order to win the sort of the pissing contest of who's strongest, just make the other person say first and add 5 pounds. And then,
Yeah.
right. Like
Yeah. Maybe that's all it is.
Yeah. And then I think that by chasing those metrics, you really fall out of the idea that you're not going to be elite to very good at all of them. Like it's very difficult, and if you are, you already know it because you're playing D1 ball somewhere, or you did, right? Like if you are good at all lifts, you're just an athlete. So chances are there's gonna be some things you're not as good at expressing strength through, some sort of plane that you can't do, and then chasing a made up number like, hey, you gotta be able to shoulder press twice your body weight, something insane like that, might force you into choosing motions or movements or range of motions that predispose you to an injury. And that's, I mean, my final comment on this, because I mean, with all the high school kids I deal with, right, when they talk about what so and so did at the school gym, and I'm like, dude, unless I saw that range of motion, we don't count any of that, right?
No.
Like
Yeah.
right, because
Squat isn't a squat. Like it's are you talking all the way to the ground? Are you talking halfway? Is it off of a box? Like what are you talking about?
Yeah. And then same with deadlifts. Are we comparing body shapes, sizes?
Oh yeah.
So
there's definitely a body shape and size that lends itself to being good at a particular lift or not,
100%.
which is kind of partly why some people get into things like a hobby of powerlifting, because they're kind of already good at it.
Yeah.
They're sort of already shaped for it. But someone who's lanky, let's say slender and 6'6" is not going to have a good squat no matter what. They're just not built for it. But someone who's a lot more compact and is really thick to begin with, they might have a world-class potential for a squat if they bother to do it. And right out of the gate, like one of the guys I trained with, he could bench press rep 315 in high school, when he was 17 years old. I've never been able to do that. Not without a ton of drugs. I could barely get to that number. You could do that number. You could do something like that
back
all
in
the time.
Yeah.
So now he got all the way up to 600 pounds. But he was built for it.
Yeah.
But he was built for it. I couldn't do it. I mean, so I guess what's the message here? There's no such thing as how strong you should be. If you're interested at all in strength, the only thing to compare yourself to is yourself.
I was just going to say that the best metric is 5 pounds more than last year.
Well,
right?
Just compare your strength to your strength from when you started. And if it's going up and you care about this concept of building strength, well, if it's going up, then you're obviously building strength. Now that could be, there's different kinds of strength too, right? There's maximum strength. And then there's things like strength endurance. So strength over reps, right? So there's different kinds of strength. There's not even just one strength. There's strength in different lifts. There's no such thing as just one kind of strength. So that's another thing to consider if you're even thinking in terms of how strong I should be.
Yeah.
And don't compare yourself to anyone else. And it's just compared to yourself. And if you are interested, pick some kind of metric. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be, I would say most people never do 1 rep maxes. It's just the risk of injury is too high and the benefit is not there unless this is your hobby, like you do powerlifting or you compete in some kind of hobby Olympic style lifting.
Then, yeah.
Well, I mean, if that's what you want to do, fine, do it. But just understand you're putting yourself at risk when you push to that level. It doesn't matter how.
Equations. Yeah, like the Epley equation, we've used it so much now, and it is, within the range of, like, I would say 5 to 12, 13 reps, something in there. So your maximal amount of reps you can do at a weight, as long as it ends in there. The Epley equation, which is, we'll throw it somewhere. It's just a math equation you plug numbers into, and it'll estimate your 1 rep max. And it is ridiculously close. So you don't need to, even then, you barely need to do the 1 rep max ever until you're just getting used to holding that amount of weight, right?
Yeah.
So
there's a difference between what your estimated max is and what you actually can do.
Yeah.
Like, to get good at 1 rep max, you have to train 1 rep max.
Yeah,
to
get to feel that weight.
Yes. To get good at a 5 rep max, you have to train at 5 reps. To get good at a 10 rep max, meaning what's the most you can do for 10 reps, you got to train at 10 reps. That's how specific it gets.
Yeah.
And then and whatever the exercise is, as soon as you change your posture, that's a new exercise with its own max.
Yeah.
So
incline bench, like sumo squat sumo deadlift, conventional deadlift, incline bench, flat bench. Did you change it slightly? It's all new, right?
All of it. Switch your hand position, it changes. So, I mean, this idea of strength, when you dig into it, it quickly becomes kind of meaningless. So, I mean, for anyone who has an idea of how strong they're supposed to be, I would urge them to consider all of these factors. Why do you even care? If you're weight training, what's your actual goal? Is it just to build some muscle mass? Is it for, like we started the talk about, longevity? Because if that's the case, just any amount of weight training is better than nothing, and then just roll with that. But we've seen people live long, healthy lives without ever lifting a weight. So it's not a necessity, but it likely probably does improve your risk benefit ratio on certain things, specifically falls and stuff like bone. Breaking bones when you get older can be pretty bad. So, but other than that, it's just a personal choice, and I would consider injury. I would never go into the 5-3 1 rep ranges on any of your traditional lifts. Again, just speaking of the lifts in the gym, like bench press, squat, deadlift, all that stuff.
Right.
To me, the risk of injury, just especially as you get older, and I mean older meaning past your 20s, you're just constantly increasing the risk of injury by going that heavy. And I just don't see the benefit unless it's your hobby. But again, you have to at least be honest with yourself that you're introducing the risk of injury for no other reason than the fascination with how much you can lift.
Yep.
And but that's fine. And if you get hurt, but you knew you were doing that to yourself. I trained with some powerlifters who had to have various joints reconstructed and bone spurs and like a bunch of bone pieces, fragments.
How big was a chunk taken out of the elbow? Remember you described, was it a golf ball or something? It
almost the size of a kneecap of a patella. And this is all just like bone fragments. So, and then the doctor was like, next time we're putting in a titanium elbow. And it was just up to him to decide, like, is he going to keep going and wearing that elbow out even further? And we're not talking about someone who's very old, but they're already talking about destroying a joint to the point where it has to be replaced.
Actually, if you think about it, when that happened, would he be younger than we are now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So I mean, it's up to you if your fascination with strength gets you to the point. Now, maybe that's preventing you from being even more destructive to yourself elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I do know some people who have addictive personalities where if they don't exercise their way to injury, they're going to drug their way to death.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, and that's just, it's the lesser of two evils, and the poison of exercising to the point of hurting yourself is going to sustain you longer than if that addiction gets dumped into something. And I know I'm talking very extreme right now. Most people may not relate to this, but there are people who have figured out the only way for me to not succumb to a drug, alcohol or a hard drug to service their addiction, they rechannel it into exercise, but then they exercise their way to injury, or they start adopting extreme events.
Right.
I would say at the least that one isn't going to kill you, or won't kill you anywhere near as fast. And
That's
you
true.
might just keep getting hurt, but fine. You can, the medical system can constantly repair injuries from exercise. They can't do much for you if you're on meth. Like you're just on your way to death that way. So I went way off the deep end, but I know multiple people who this was why they got into powerlifting, or this was why they got into extreme sports.
With exercise, right? Yeah.
Well, they used to be on a drug that would have killed them.
Mm-hmm.
They managed to get out of it, but they've learned about themselves that addiction, it's this idea that I'm an addict. Well, yeah, you are. Once you know you are, that's what you are.
Yeah.
And they've understood / accepted the addiction never goes away, but you can point it at something less harmful.
Right.
Now, for them, they've learned, I'm not going to name these people, but I know multiple people who they've learned pointed at an exercise or pointed at a sport, an event, something that feeds that addiction. Now, again, because they're such extreme, this is an extreme brain set. I don't know, personality. It's an extreme situation you're in, an extreme psychology when you're going from an addictive personality behavior that could have been so bad and has been so bad that you were on the verge of death via drug addiction, where you repointed at an exercise. And now you train yourself to injury, way 100 times better than being on the drug. Yeah. So again, we've gone all over the place with this, but that's maybe that person can't not chase the strength because they're like, this is the only way I'm gonna stay alive.
Yeah.
And they go to the point where they bust up joints and all that stuff, but okay, fine. We can keep repairing your joints. But other than that, being an ultra extreme version of chasing strength to sub in something else in an addictive thing, put that aside. Strength is just relative to where you used to be. And if you're interested in gaining strength, fine. And just be realistic with all of the factors we talked about, like muscle group specific, exercise specific, age specific, all of those different things. Like how strong could you or should you be, and for what benefit? That's all up to you. And the only rational way to think about it is if you're going to bother strength training, just measure over time. Are you improving? Also, accept the fact that as you get older, your strength is never going to go up. Like peak strength happens somewhere between late 20s, early 30s. So if you have been training since 20-ish high school age, you've already hit your peak strength. If you were consistent, and you put consistent effort in, your peak strength was already somewhere around 30 years old. Yeah. And like I'm 50 now. There's no way I'm ever revisiting that strength. So for me, the idea of even gaining, quote unquote, gaining strength compared to what? My 25-year-old self's way stronger than I'll ever be now. Yeah. So I also have to have
a bit of realism.
Yeah. You have to really, where are you in life? What does this number even matter? And it's not your peak. It's what you can do now for, I don't know, whatever your present goal has to be. So just be honest with yourself, I guess, is really the thing. And there's no such thing as the correct amount of strength. Don't compare yourself to anyone else.
Yeah. It's just, they're built different, right? Everyone's built slightly different. Yeah. Yep. Done.
I don't know. Is that, I think we kind of beat that one up a bit.
Across. Yeah. It's silly.
Yeah. It's strength, just, whatever.
Yeah.
All right. So let us know in the comments if that made any sense to anybody. And if you have another take on it, something you think we missed, and we could maybe revisit this in another episode.
Yep. Let us know.
So we'll leave it there for today. So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barbin, and that's your 5 Life Podcast.